in Gaza, the IDF forces are continuing their operations on the ground, strengthening their hold in the north and expanding those activities also all through the central and southern areas of the Gaza Strip, particularly in Khan Yunis, where the IDF forces have been uncovering and destroying dozens and dozens of these Hamas terror attack tunnels that they'd built, getting closer and closer both to the hostages and closing in on the Hamas leadership, and at the same time still managing to eliminate some of those original terrorists who participated in the October 7 massacre and have been running away from the IDF forces for the last 120 odd days. The hostages are still being moved around by the terrorists in Gaza. Every time they move, they take the hostages who they're using as human shields along with them. This is something that we've seen constantly, and this is part of the discussion that we'll have later as to what exactly to do with the hostages, how to possibly negotiate a solution to the hostage problem, if any type of solution is possible, and what the differences are between us and the US administration. In the north, Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy, continues to attack Israel, firing again rockets today towards Rosh HaNikra, Israel's north, with the Israeli forces responding there, as we've said every day. There is a war going on in the north. Some 2,000 rockets have been fired by Hezbollah. The IDF has responded, killing over 160 terrorists. That's a war that we're less talking about, but is a war that is nonetheless important to know that is going on. The Houthis in the south, no change in that situation. They are continuing on with their aggression, with the responses of the US-led coalition forces. In Judea and Samaria, we've seen a number of attempted terrorist attacks today, both in the south of in Judea and both in Samaria as well. A stabbing attack and an attempted shooting attack in Samaria. So that situation is continuing on. IDF forces are also continuing there to arrest thousands of terrorists since October 7. We're now standing at over 3,100 terrorists arrested just in Judea and Samaria. In Israel, thankfully, within the green line, we've managed to continue on with the calm. Nothing of a particular note to mention there. And that really brings us on to our discussion today. Our discussion today really is going to focus on what are our relations with our US partners, our US allies, and we're joined today with Colonel in Reserves, Dr. Eran Lerman. Dan will introduce Dr. Lerman, and really because he can do a better job than I can, and we'll really understand where we're going to go from here in these US-Israeli relations. Dan, over to you.
Maurice, thanks for that update. Dr. Eran Lerman, former Deputy Head of the National Security Council, it's a pleasure, honor to have you with us on the program. As we were speaking just before we went live, Dr. Lerman, the international, let's call it diplomatic aspect to this metastasizing what's already a regional conflict is of particular importance to us today. It's particularly complex. And you clearly in your former roles have been a principal in these discussions, particularly with the United States. Help us create some context here. We have Secretary of State Blinken in Egypt on his way to Israel for the 6th time since October the 7th. The American administration determined to stop the current war against the Iranian-backed Hamas, to try to engineer a major hostage deal together with the Qataris, and essentially they have, of course, called for what they call a two-state solution, which in Israel, from side to side, is considered a prize for genocide. We clearly get. We're about to. The Congress is about to decide on a $17.5 billion package, including major armament provision and other critically important assistance to us. How do you see this chessboard at this current moment?
Well, we are in a very complicated situation because, of course, politics, both in Israel and in Washington, intrude on what is basically a strong and healthy relationship. Well, sorry about the distraction. Not mine. But I would let me say that the basic position of the United States has been supportive. It's been supportive of the idea that Israel is entitled to destroy Hamas as a military force and as the governing authority in Gaza. At the end of the day, I don't think this position has changed. I don't think what they are seeking now is an outcome that would leave Hamas in power. They may hope for the creation of a way out of the present situation that does not involve the continuation of the war. But if there's none, they will continue to support the Israeli position. The administration remains committed to the immense aid package that you mentioned. Congress is very strongly in support of the Israeli position, with the exception of the Squad and some marginal elements in both houses, but the vast majority of senators and representatives are on board. The irony is that what's delaying the aid package right now is not so much the question of support for Israel, but rather if the Israeli aid package is the engine, the question is what are the other, what can be hitched to it that will carry, we shall help carry up the hill, whether this is money for border defenses in Texas or support for Ukraine, and various American players have their own agendas. They all agree that Israel should get what the administration asked for and maybe more, but they try to hitch their own agendas to this project. So the situation is indeed quite complicated.
The hitching, Eran, just to hitch on to your point, the political hitching in Congress is a standard, right? I mean, this is nothing new. It's a further it's another variable in these deliberations.
Well, that's always happens. Normal conditions, of course, aid package is the one that enables administrations over the years to get the entire aid package, function 150 of the U.S. budget, to be passed through a reluctant Congress. So, and that has been the case for many years. Now we are increasingly caught in a polarized American environment in which Republicans in the Republican majority in the House and the Democratic majority in the Senate are using the Israeli portfolio to clash with each other, which is a pity. My instinct basically is that ultimately there will be a solution to this problem, because nobody wants to leave Israel on neither side, as said, except the outliers in the far right and far left, want to leave Israel unfunded during in the context of this war. So I don't think there is going to be any attempt to force Israel's hand when it comes to pursuing the war. At the same time, we do have a problem with the administration, I would say largely because Israel has yet so far failed to formulate what it wants in the day after. And in the absence of a coherent Israeli position, and with some Israelis expressing positions that the administration and many other Americans would find very difficult to accept, to the point of talking about having the Palestinians removed from Gaza, there is some ground for tension and for unpleasant side comments and whatever else. And and an administration-inspired essays by Tom Friedman, and the whole range of ways of sniping at the present Israeli government. Had there been a more coherent Israeli position, I don't think we would have found ourselves in the same kind of difficulty.
You know, Eran, it reminds us also of the ongoing call right now as we speak. The Prime Minister Netanyahu today has called for the IDF within a week to figure out an alternative plan to the UNRWA problem, which of course the UNRWA has become both a headquarters for the Hamas. It's become a supply force for the Hamas primarily, and the humanitarian aid to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars is not getting to the general population in Gaza. The problem being that there is no plan either for UNRWA, which has become really an international issue of the greatest import, with up to 15 countries already pulling their funding out of
19, last count I saw was 19 countries already pulling out.
Unprecedented since 1949. So there is sort of in the crisis stems opportunity. And the question is, I know you've been involved in this issue for many decades. What is your sense about the discussions you and I have had in the past about even Israel leading an international governing, monitoring body, not to dismantle UNRWA at this moment, but to monitor it and manage it?
Well, frankly, there is an opportunity and a threat here. The opportunity is, of course, to get rid of an organization that has been used to perpetuate the Palestinian refugee status 4 generations into Palestinian history, which no other refugee definition in the world would accept, and a thoroughly corrupt and penetrated organization. And the international reaction to the revelations about the participation of UNRWA workers in the massacres of October 7 has been remarkable and to some extent even surprising, because we've seen in the past all kinds of more forgiving attitudes, and now the position has gelled in a different direction. However, the threat is that in the absence of UNRWA, if it is allowed to disintegrate, and they are talking about running out of funds by March this year, Israel may find itself burdened with the necessity of engineering an alternative. And once again, the lack of a decision at the governmental level at this stage about a workable plan for the day after ties in with the absence of so far of an effective alternative. I don't know if the IDF is resourceful enough, planners are resourceful enough to come with a solution within a week. Maybe this was also by way of a rebuke to those in the defense establishment who for years have argued that UNRWA, for all its faults, is better than the alternative. But I would say that as we increasingly learn that the cost of leaving the whole set of issues on the future of Gaza open is becoming higher and higher, we have to put the UNRWA element, the UNRWA givens, into this new and complicated equation. How do we replace Hamas government with a transitional type of solution that Israel can live with, the international community can support, and will actually make the place safer? It's a challenge. It's a challenge of the first order.
I think you said it very well, Eran. It's a real challenge, and this may be one of the, I would say, legitimate reasons that the Israeli government has not yet engineered a plan for the day after, because we don't really know what the day after is going to look like. We don't know if what we call the day after Hamas. We have to complete the sentence, right? The day after Hamas. And you know, as an expert in the Middle East, that any state actor, whether it's the Saudis or the Bahrainis or the Emiratis or anyone else that has the capability, the cultural understanding, the language understanding to play a key role on the ground in Gaza will never follow the Israeli Defense Forces, for being called puppets or some sort of affiliate associated.
Coming in on Israeli bayonets. That's one aspect. But also, I would say that the Palestinians themselves are very wary of their Arab cousins and have been for many years. That there's not much love lost on either side of this equation. And therefore, I believe that we need to think creatively about who and how to put together the elements of a transitional regime or governance, or maybe even something that can be applied in a modular fashion in Gaza. But these are issues that need to be resolved in very close consultation with the American administration, who they must take by definition they must take the lead in generating an alternative. And frankly, the easy way out for many in Washington and in other capitals in the West is to say, well, bring the Palestinian Authority in. And even if you leave aside any ideological difficulties that we may have with that idea, any historical grievances or questions of whether their policies over the years entitle them to such a reward, the actual question of capability, it stares us in the face. This is an organization of corrupt thieves, incompetent, led by people who hardly can manage their immediate environment, who have already lost control effectively of Jenin and Nablus, and with their security forces do cooperate with us, but they do so simply because otherwise they will not survive. I used to say they do it for gravitational reasons, because being thrown off the 16th floor, as happened to their colleagues in Gaza, is not a pleasant experience. So at the end of the day, this is an organization, an entity that cannot deliver on what is expected of it.
Well, it's a very important point you're making, Eran. It's an important point, and it's really interesting because Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Maurice Hirsch at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs is the director of this. One of our major initiatives is called the Palestinian Authority Accountability Initiative. It used to be called Accountability and Reform, and now it's sort of transformed into why the Palestinian Authority, as you've suggested here, cannot be the responsible sovereign or custodian or manager of a post-Hamas Gaza, because of the reasons that you've outlined. This massive incentivization of what we call pay to slay, the incitement to terrorism, the international, what I would call legal terrorism, or the use of legal instruments, as they did in South Africa at the behest of the Iranian regime, to corner and terrorize Israel on these other diplomatic, media, and other battlefields. What is your sense, Maurice, before we pass it back to Eran, about considering why the PA cannot be the responsible governing power in Gaza, versus some of the other things that you wrote together with the Bitonistim in the joint plan that we crafted and presented even to the Prime Minister?
So Dan, I'm sure that Iran and also the Americans are quite familiar with all of the reasons why the PA cannot be considered an alternative in Gaza. It's the same organization which has never really accepted Israel's right to exist, or even built any type of mechanism for promoting peace with Israel as part of those Oslo Accords. Really, the opposite has been true. They've incited all the way along, incited violence, incited murder, incited terrorism, and those really foundation blocks have come up over and over again. The Americans have seen them. That was part even of the famous roadmap that was instituted many years ago, almost 20 years ago, as how to get out of that cycle of violence. Since then, really, everybody's been talking about the PA incitement, and it hasn't changed. It's only got worse. So the incitement, the denial of Israel's right to exist, the promotion of terrorism, as you mentioned, Dan, this institutionalized plan to incentivize and reward terror. The Americans know about it. They implemented and enacted the Taylor Force Act. They themselves have been
for which I must say the JCPA should take some serious credit.
Yeah, without question. Yossi Kuperwasser was heavily involved in that as well. All of these things and bringing them to the forefront, Dan, these are all subjects which the U.S. administration knows and sees. What unfortunately, and maybe on this you can weigh in, Eran, is why not only Israel's government but also the U.S. administration is intentionally blind to all of these things. Why do they still talk about revitalizing the Palestinian Authority when they know that it's a corrupt organization? Not only has it failed with Israel, but the Palestinian people hate the Palestinian Authority. They don't want to see Mahmoud Abbas in power for even another day. And this isn't something that's new. It's consistent surveys that have been carried out over years and years and years. When will that tipping point be reached, when also the U.S. administration will say this Oslo experiment has failed? The Palestinian Authority cannot be revitalized. It cannot be revamped. We need to really start again from the beginning and build something which is, as they said about the JCPA, but really seriously, stronger and better.
Well, I believe that one possibility down the road, again, once Israel puts its own act together, is to lay down a roadmap, indeed, but a very different one, that will begin with a new and reconstructed Gazan entity, demilitarized and subject to Israeli direct or indirect control against the resurgence of terrorism, which would ultimately create conditions that can then be also implemented in other areas under Palestinian control, a kind of a reverse of what the administration has in mind. But it's basically just this I would say not obsessive but persistent preoccupation with the idea of the two-state solution, Trump coming ahead of all other things that need to happen. I would suggest quite strongly that the ideas that we are hearing now in Washington, or that are briefed to Tom Friedman, for example, are basically a case of hitching a broken cart ahead of the horse, in front of the horse, or horses. There need to be three serious horses first: destruction of Hamas, I would say a change in Israel's relationship with its strategic environment, including, by the way, an understanding with the Egyptians that will enable us to operate in the Rafah area without raising Egyptian alarm, and also a new relationship with others in the region, including Saudi Arabia, although I would not overestimate the importance of that aspect. And most importantly, an effective new policy vis-a-vis Iran. Without dealing effectively with the Iranian threat, with all its ramifications, with all of its proxy operations, not only against us, but against America, the international community, and the stability of every element in the region that seeks a better future, without dealing with Iran effectively, there's no prospect whatsoever of moving ahead towards stabilization and de-radicalization and ultimately peace in the Israeli-Palestinian context. So these are the horses and they should be hitched first. And then the cart should be fixed very thoroughly, as you suggest. The PA, as it stands now, is not a vehicle you can ride on. It needs to be completely revamped in every aspect, including de-radicalization. They apparently heard the rumble in the background, because they have now mentioned that there may be a reform also of their pay for slay policies. I will believe this when I see it, not when I hear all kinds of leaked rumors. But at the end of the day, they need to be changed so thoroughly that we would be in a very different position than where we are now. And all of this would take years, and during these years, we need an alternative framework.
Sorry, Dan. Just already in 2020, when the Biden administration started, the Palestinians were talking about this idea, and it was splashed on a big article in the New York Times of the PA's intention to reform its pay for slave policy. I recently asked the authors of that article whether they'd seen any information or corroboration of that story, which they published, which even at the time wasn't a reflection really of the truth. Unfortunately, there's been no change there whatsoever. And the PA, as we know, are really spending more and more funds, even incentivizing and rewarding the participants in the October 7 massacre. So I don't know if we're going to see any progress there.
Yeah,
I doubt it myself.
One of the issues that was raised by one of our very highly educated and I would say well-informed viewer listeners is Elise Gorson suggests, in quoting some of the discussion we've had here, Eran, in past briefings, and yesterday we had a Middle East Forum, Dr. Pipes, talk about, there are local families and clans in Gaza who, on a practical, not only theoretical level, practical level, represent the different districts and municipalities in the those five major municipalities from the north to the southern Gaza Strip. This seems a possibility. However, it seems to require an overwhelming victory by Israel, so that there's no doubt in the minds of the local population who is in charge. Because if Hamas isn't even in charge governmentally, even if they're wiped out militarily or in terms of their terrorist capabilities, they still control water, who turns on and off the water, who turns on and off the electricity, who distributes foodstuffs and coupons and so on. So unless Israel has complete and total victory, it looks like there's no possibility for local leadership. What's your sense of it?
Well, first of all, I would not necessarily rely on clan and structures in a highly complex society in which, alongside the clans, there are urban young people. There is the so-called cleavage between old Gazans, pre-48 families, and the refugee population, which is by far larger. It's a complicated place, and it requires, I would say, a slow and steady treatment to create a local leadership which is both de-radicalized and reliable. A return to the old Fatawi elite that governed Gaza for the PA before the Hamas coup in 2007 is also not a very good idea. Most of them have either been eliminated or are no longer young and energetic, to put it mildly. So we have to put in a structure, and I'm not going to speculate here as to who and how, but something that will support a slow and steady and reliable growth of local leadership. It cannot be done via the PA, for all the reasons we've mentioned now. It cannot be done at the end of the day also by the Israeli, by the IDF as such. We will need, I would say, some sort of international involvement. And to put this together, and I'm going back to your point, Dan, about the timing.
Yeah.
It's true, we have no idea as yet of what the situation is really going to be like. On the other hand, we also have to hurry a bit in formulating our own concepts for two reasons. One is that the opinion in Washington and elsewhere may gel in the absence of Israeli initiatives. It may gel around very problematic ideas, as we are already beginning to see. And secondly, if we do manage to outline an effective alternative, it may take quite a long time to put it together. So the initial steps may need to be taken soon.
Maurice, what's your sense?
That's something which really I think that we do need to be discussing. I think it's hard to. I can understand to a certain extent the position of the Israeli government saying it's not yet time to build a clear and certain plan for the day after, because we don't really know when that will come, what developments there will be on the way, and so that's a limitation. But on the other hand, and that's why we at the JCPA, together with the Bitonistim, with the IDSF, launched into this idea of nonetheless coming up with this plan for the day after. We need to have an idea of what's going to be. We need to have an idea, as you said, Eran, that we can't go back to the old original Fathawi leadership there. We can't go back to anything that's even close to Hamas. We have to actually destroy Hamas, because that really is the only gateway through which we can make any change there. And I think at this stage, no one's really sure exactly how long that's going to take or what's going to be in the interim. And so that, I think, is the hesitation from the Israeli government. I think that it's possibly something that needs to be improved in the very, very near future. I think the Israeli government should have more confidence in the abilities and really the successes of the IDF in getting to the Hamas leadership, and really should be hesitant to rush into I think what could possibly be hasty deals that would further strengthen Hamas. And so within all of those, I think differentials, the Israeli government does need to put a plan on the table for the international community. The international community, I would argue, and we argued at the JCPA, has to take a position and has to take a place in the rehabilitation of Gaza. No one wants to see starving Gazans. No one wants to see Gazans unemployed. But at the same time, Gaza isn't the sole responsibility of Israel. And therefore, the international community must be there as part of the solution. The international community, yes, the UN, I would argue, has no place to play in Gaza. It is part of the problem and no part of the solution.
Let me mention that there are models of multinational authority rather than international in the UN sense. For example, the MFO in Sinai, which was to some extent an accident of history, because the UN could not come in. The Russians, the Soviets at the time, were opposed to the peace treaty. But what was created was an effective management group, in this case, just three countries, Israel, Egypt, and the United States, managing a multinational force and giving it its mandate. Of course, the reconstruction in Gaza is more complicated by two or three factors than just monitoring military presence of Egyptian military elements in Sinai. But still, the template, as was suggested in an essay of my friend Robert Silverman in the magazine I edit in the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune, the template of the MFO, multinational rather than international, should, I think, be given a serious consideration. Anything the UN touches dies on the vine. Think of UNIFIL and how useless they have been, because they are a UN mandated rather than a multinationally mandated organization.
What's amazing, I think, about the JCPA, Dan, if I can sing Ambassador Baker's praises before him, is that was exactly one of the comments of Ambassador Baker already from the outset of making the plan and everything else, that we have this multinational force that's already in existence, and we should use that. I think on that, Eran, you really hit the mark with what Ambassador Baker has been telling us all the way along about developing the plan and what really could be the solution.
Well, I'm in good company, I should say. Alan is a tower of strength.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the greatest characteristics that Ambassador Baker represents is an intellectual proactivity in initiating creative solutions, but really taking the initiative, certainly from a legal standpoint and a management standpoint, whether it has to do with UNRWA or whether it has to be the current draft convention on international prohibition on anti-Semitism, which he's doing right now. It's a little bit off our topic here, but just the general point is the requirement for Israeli policy to change. This is the question that I'd like to consult with you on, Dr. Lerman. Is Israel, it seems, has to really reconsider the proactivity of its own policies, whether it's monitoring terror groups, just witnessing the shock of what happened from a perceptual standpoint on October 7th. The fact that the Palestinian Authority for decades, for 3 decades and 1 year, 31 years, has been engaging in this, massive campaign of Soviet and Nazi and conspiracy theories against Jews in Israel, media warfare, incentivization warfare, and all of a sudden people in the West are saying, well, wait a second, why not the PA? In other words, there's all this surprise, and Israel, in a way, has been caught, certainly without a policy or monitoring clothing, if you will. And it seems that Israel has to be very, very careful but much more proactive in the case that it makes for its own security and the case that it makes for exposing its adversaries and enemies.
And I should say also in the case that it makes for the ultimate welfare also of our Palestinian neighbors, those who are not implicated in acts of terror. I used to in the early days of Oslo, I used to ask myself, do these good people who are so excited about this project have the slightest idea what they are inflicting not only on us, but first and foremost on the Palestinians themselves, given the kind of leadership. At the time, this was still Yasser Arafat, whom I've learned a thing or two about over the years. And again, any solution that does not take into account the catastrophic consequences for the Palestinians themselves of leaving them once again to the mercies of those for whom the destruction of Israel is a first priority, I think is morally wrong. We are being moralized to by the world in the absence of any understanding of what the real moral equation is.
Yeah, very clearly. Another issue comes up now about messaging policy, Eran. Here you have Minister Ben-Gvir making very far-reaching comments about the Biden administration, and clearly Israel has always been bipartisan in its approach to administrations. And here you have a very severe criticism being leveled by a senior Israeli minister on the current administration that has supplied Israel with billions of dollars of assistance and aid, and as well as international diplomatic cover at the UN and in other international fora, notwithstanding the very real disagreement that the Netanyahu coalition has, and that Israel, I would say, generally has with the political approach currently with some of the aspects of the policies of administration. What is your sense about message discipline, in a coalition government context?
I've actually written a paper for this, which JISS carried, calling for much stricter message discipline, at least from government ministers. The spectacle that we are seeing of irresponsible behavior, and this is, I hope that our good American friends simply put this down to puerile incoherence, but of some people. But to see these people in positions of power within a government is highly problematic. We never in our history did we need greater discipline by government ministers and people who are perceived by the outside our borders as speaking for the government when actually they do not. And I know that the Prime Minister and the people closest to him have always understood the importance of bipartisanship and this kind of language. And frankly, also the things that we saw the other day in Binyanei Ha'uma, with a good number of coalition MKs and ministers in participation, are nearly amount to harming the cause, the national cause at wartime, which is a serious offense. I don't want to use a sharper language, but discipline must, members of Knesset and media pundits can speak as they wish, but people who have sworn to serve as ministers of a government do need to be very, very careful when they speak.
Yes. Maurice, final thoughts from you, and then final thoughts from Dr. Lerman.
I think one of the things that the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinians in general managed to truly master was to control the narrative. It didn't matter what you asked Hanan Ashrawi. You could ask her about the weather in Canada. She would say, well, in the occupation, it's affected by. That was always the message. It was unified. It was clear. It was on target. And I think that the requirement that Israel's government of its ministers stay on message. There's no need to necessarily avoid discussing subjects which are ideologically based, but there is that requirement to stay on message, and it's something which we have consistently failed in. That's why, for example, the debacle of the International Court of Justice with South Africa's claim of genocide was really referring also, amongst other things, to rogue statements and really some of them not particularly great statements made by some of the ministers in the government, which they were just superfluous. They were unnecessary. They didn't make them any points, and really did cause damage. And I think that's something that we need to do. It requires that proactiveness, Dan and Dr. Lerman. It requires us to take a stand and say, well, these are our lines. This is where we're going. But that requires setting that plan also as to where we're going, before we can discuss with the Americans where they think they want to take us.
Eran, you're thinking about, let's say we're in an era now, or in a moment now where conceptions have been broken, conceptions that are decades long about the Palestinian Authority, about some sort of diplomatic resolution between us and the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria. What needs to happen in Gaza? It seems that we're back at ground zero once again from a policy standpoint.
Well, to some extent, again, as you said, this is a crisis and an opportunity, as the famous saying goes about the Chinese character that symbolizes both. We have an opportunity to think seriously about the future. And I think we have an opportunity to engage seriously with the American administration on this question. We have to bear in mind that there are positives that we didn't mention here. For example, the very close relationship now between the military on both sides of the Atlantic, Israel's role in CENTCOM, the seamless support that we've seen on very important issues when it comes to military, defense to defense interactions. Let's build on that as well. I think it will help us down the road. But ultimately, it's time for Israel to make up its collective mind on the basis of the broadest possible consensus of what we can and should do to create a new reality in Gaza after Hamas.
Well, we'll be delighted to chat with you and continue deep in this conversation. Dr. Eran Lerman, the Vice President of the JCPA, the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies, as well as a former deputy head of the National Security Council, one of the most thoughtful, not only intellectuals, but policy planners we have in Israel. It's always a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. Maurice Hirsch, also a great pleasure to have you hosting and co-hosting this program now. And it's 100, what are we in the 123rd day of the program? Where they're about to syndicate us and send us to Hollywood.
123rd day of the war, Dan, but we're not at the 100th program yet. We've had a few Fridays off and things like that. So we've got maybe another 10 days to go before we get to that 100 mark.
Very good. Well,
Okay.
we're marching on, and then we thank our viewers and our participants for supporting us. And if you're so inclined to support the program or one of our initiatives, we have a Defensible Borders initiative that we're bringing to the United States. That can be earmarked for your assistance, but through JGive on the site. And we thank all of you for participating with us and supporting us. So God bless, and everyone should stay safe from Jerusalem. We'll look forward to being with all of you tomorrow.